I'm Kerr. Welcome to my art studio. Sometimes when you're painting a watercolour landscape, if you have to paint a great big mass of summer or autumn trees that look like this, you wonder how you can go about it. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you a very easy way of painting a whole mass of trees very simply. So, are you ready? Sometimes when we paint a landscape picture, we're confronted with something like this, which is a huge area of trees, and we think, where on earth do I start? And the temptation is to pick up a tiny brush and start painting lots and lots of little leaves. So I'm going to show you a way where you can produce something like this very easily without having to fiddle around with painting individual leaves. Now, just to let you know that the colours I'm going to use are, and these are all Daniel Smith colours, cobalt blue, Hansa yellow medium, raw sienna light, transparent red oxide, which is very much like burnt sienna. So if you're using another brand of paints, then burnt sienna would be absolutely fine, and pyrrole scarlet. So everything I'm going to be using is going to be a mixture of those 5 colours. So I've already mixed up my colours before I start, and here they are. So lots of variations of those 5 colours. So here we go. It's going to be a smallish area like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is to wet my paper. I always paint on a wet background if I possibly can, because that gives me lovely, lovely soft edges. I always try and get at least 2/3 of my paintings done with the paper wet. I don't want hard edges unless the actual object is up close to me. So the first thing I'll do is to pick up a little bit of my cobalt blue that's got a tiny bit of the transparent red oxide mixed in with it, and I'm going to paint my sky. So I don't want a very fussy sky because I'm going to have quite a detailed little area of trees, so I'll keep my sky very simple. Paint that all the way down. And add a little bit more at the top just to make it a tiny bit darker at the top. Sky is always darker at the top and lighter when you get down towards the horizon. So then, while my paper is still wet, I'm going to pick up a mixture of cobalt blue that's got a little bit more burnt sienna in it. So it's a little bit darker. Now I'm going to drop in a few little background trees here, just above the horizon, just with this mixture of cobalt blue and transparent red oxide. I just want them to blend into the sky, so they're a long, long, long way away in the distance, so no real detail there whatsoever. When something is far away from you, you don't notice any details. You just see sort of shapes and colours. Have you noticed the size of the brush I'm using? Always use the biggest brush you possibly can for the area that you're painting. That means you do less strokes, and therefore your painting looks much, much fresher. Now I'm going to pick up my big round brush, which is a size 12, and I'm going to make it slightly damp, because I don't want to be adding any more water to this. This is still nice and moist, but I don't want to be adding extra water to it, because if I do, it'll water down my paints. So I'm going to pick up some of my lightest yellowy green, and I'm going to use my brush by having my thumb on one side and 4 fingers on the other. That's what we call a dry brush technique hold. And I'm going to be scraping my brush along the paper rather than just using the point. So I'm just going to be pulling my brush along the paper like this. And I'm going to be dropping in this light colour, scraping it along, leaving lots of spaces. Then I'm going to move on to the slightly darker green. And I'm going to drop that in as well. And I'm not worried if it goes over what I've already painted. Not worried about that at all, because I want them to blend together. And then go on again to the slightly darker green again, and pull that in, sliding it along, sliding my brush along, so that the colours are all blending together. And I'm going to go into one of the, my paint is drying incredibly quickly because it's very warm where I am at the moment. So I'm now going to drop in some of the orangey colour. Drop that in as well, let it all fuse and blend together. That's where your lovely, lovely soft edges come from. Wow. Super, super. I'll put a little bit more of the yellow, slightly darker yellow over here. I'm imagining that the sun is coming in this direction, so this will be the lightest part of my sort of group of trees. Back into my slightly darker green. As I probably mentioned before, I live in Spain and it is incredibly hot here at the moment. It's about 38 degrees. So my paint is drying so quickly that I have really got to be quite quick with this. So I'm dropping in my slightly darker green. And I'm going to go back to my lovely orangey red. Put a little bit more of that in as well. Put a bit of that down here. And I'm going to go to my really, really dark green, which is a mixture of cobalt blue and transparent red oxide. And then I'm going to drop that into near the bottom of the mixture of the area of trees. Vegetation down at the bottom will always be much thicker and heavier than it is further up, because you've got bushes growing in the ground, and you've got fallen leaves and things under the trees. But up here at the top of the tree, it'll be much more sparse. So I'll put a little bit of the dark in here. Notice how I'm holding my brush. I'm not holding the point like this and painting with the point. I'm using the actual side of the brush and dropping everything in while it's still wet. I've got my little water bottle here, so if I want to give it a little bit of a spray, just to keep things nice and damp, so it doesn't dry on me too quickly, I can do that. So back into the dark again. So I can just put some more of the dark over here on the edge. And while my paint is wet, I can do what I like with it, because when your paint is wet, it's alive. Once it's dried, it's not exactly dead, but there's not a lot you can do with it when it's dried, except maybe paint over the top of it, or you could actually remove it if it isn't exactly what you want. think I'm going to have a little bit more of this lovely orangey red. I think I'm going to drop a little bit more of that in here. Okay, so really all I'm doing at the moment is putting in splodges and little areas of green that don't mean a lot at the moment, but when we come back later and put in the tree trunks and things, they'll all of a sudden come alive and they'll represent the big block of woodland that we looked at in the earlier picture. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll let that dry off, and then I'll come back and put in all the exciting bits, which is the branches and the twigs, which will turn that into a little landscape painting. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, this is now sort of half dry, which is the time when you really shouldn't go back in with paint, because you can start getting rundbacks and things. But what you can do when it's half dry is you can take something like a piece of plastic card and you can actually scrape in little branches and things within the dark areas. Because all you're doing is removing paint, and it just gives you that impression of a little tree trunk or a little tree branch. So this is now completely dry, and what I'm doing here is I'm just using a little bit of the colour that I had here before, and I'm just stroking on a little bit of texture in these background trees. And then I'm taking my little rigger brush, and again with exactly the same colour, I'm just popping in a suggestion of one or two little branches just here and there in the gaps. You don't need very much at all, because this is a long way away and you really wouldn't notice very much in the way of detail in something that's a long way away like this. So just a little bit of texture, a few little branches, and then we'll leave those as they are. And then we'll come back to the main area, and again with my little rigger brush with a mixture of cobalt blue and transparent red oxide, more cobalt blue than the red oxide, because this again is going to be in the distance. I'm just going to put in some suggestion of some little trees, just coming up here. There again, you don't need much in the way of detail, just one or two way away in the distance here. And break them up a bit so that you don't have any really hard lines, little suggestions here and there of the branches. Always paint branches of a tree in the direction that they grow. In other words, you're going upwards. Don't start at the top and come down, because you'll have a blob at the end of each branch. Always paint them in the direction that they actually grow. So there's one or two little distant ones. Now I'm going to add a little bit more of the transparent red oxide to my mix, so it's just a little bit more rich, because these are going to be just a tiny bit closer to you. Not difficult, is it? It may look difficult when it's finished, but it's actually quite an easy thing to do. And you notice when I painted this, excuse me, when I painted this, it was mostly wet in wet. So all the colours blended together with beautiful soft edges. Now when I'm putting in my darker trees, I've now got a much richer brown mix with a bit more transparent red oxide in it. And I'm not going to paint big solid trunks. I'm just going to do a trunk, and then I'm going to miss a bit. And then I'm going to do a bit more, as if it's coming out of the trees. So some of the foliage is actually in front. Can you see that? It looks as though the actual foliage is coming in front of the branches. I'm going to do another one coming up here. There again, I'm going to do a bit, miss a bit, do a bit, miss a bit. I'm going to have a branch maybe going this way, so do a bit, miss a bit, do a bit, miss a bit. I'll make this trunk here just that little bit thicker because it's nearer to you. That's better. And then I'll have a nice, maybe a nice strong one coming up here. Do a bit, miss a bit, put it in the gap there. Put it coming up here. Branch going out there. So I'll just do one or two more of those and then we'll come back in and put the final touches to it. Okay, I've put a few more little branches in here, rather than having you sitting and watching me do all the individual ones. I just did those while the camera was off. And we're almost finished, so now I'm going to take my size 12 brush again and pick up a little bit of the sort of mid-green that I got mixed up and take off some of the paint on my tissue, and I'm just going to stroke it very gently over some of the lighter areas so that it gives that little bit of texture over some of the lighter areas. There we go. And then I'm also going to have a little bit of gouache. Now gouache is an opaque watercolour paint. So you can't see through it, it's opaque. So it's a good idea not to have it mixed up in your ordinary palette, because then after you've used it and you go to mix up your ordinary watercolours, you'll find that your ordinary watercolours are going chalky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on a scrap of paper, this white gouache, and mix up a bit of my Hansa yellow medium, which is my really bright yellow, so that I've got a lovely opaque lemony yellow, and I'm just going to drop a little bit of that. That's too much. I'm going to drop a little bit of that onto the dark areas of my painting, just to give it a bit of life. Just drop those now and then. It'll only show up if you've got some dark behind it. So just drop this onto the dark areas of your painting. So it's a mixture of white gouache and my Hansa yellow medium. And it just gives that little sparkle to your painting. Don't overdo it again. You can go mad with this because it's coming out so nicely. You think, yeah, I think I'll keep doing that. No, you'll spoil your painting if you do. Just little bits here and there, just to give it that little added sparkle. Now you can see how that we've turned just a mass of colour that was all blended together with lovely soft edges because it was wet in wet, and we've just turned that mass of colour into a big block of summer going into autumn trees. There we go. Now I'll take off my clips, take off the tapes. And there we have it. So you can see that it's not difficult to paint a great big area of trees like that if you just go about it by doing mostly wet in wet, letting it dry, and then coming back after it's dry to put in your final details. When painting a big area of trees like the one that we've just done, remember to keep your paper as wet as you can for as long as you can. Then let it dry and go back in and put in the details of the trunks and the branches, and then that will bring the whole thing to life, and it'll look like a lovely large area of either autumn or autumn and summer trees. If you haven't done so already, then consider subscribing to my channel. Click the little bell icon and then that will tell you when I upload another video. If you've enjoyed this one, then give it the thumbs up. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Remember, there is an artist in everyone. Goodbye for now.